The stars beyond the observation window looked cold and empty. And Captain Marcus Chun had spent 15 years learning just how cold the galaxy could be when you were human, stood alone on the command deck of Threshold Station, watching the darkness of the void border stretch endlessly before him. And he wondered if anyone back on Earth even remembered this place existed. Threshold Station was the most remote outpost in all of Concordat space. A rusting collection of modules and corridors that hung at the very edge of known civilization. And the Galactic Concordat had assigned humans here because they believed humans belonged at the edges. Forgotten and ignored Marcus was 43 years old, and he had given his entire adult life to proving that humanity deserved respect among the stars. But every promotion he earned came with an assignment further from the center of power. Further from anywhere that mattered. The Concordat was an alliance of 47 species that had ruled this region of the galaxy for over 10,000 years. And they had welcomed humanity into their ranks 15 years ago with promises of partnership and shared progress. But those promises had turned to dust the moment humans asked for anything real. Earth was the newest member of the Concordat. And the other species never let humanity forget it. Marcus turned away from the window and walked through the dimly lit corridors of his station, nodding to crew members as he passed them, and he noticed how tired they all looked, how worn down by years of being told they were not good enough. His crew was made up of 47 beings, and 23 of them were human, while the rest came from other species that the Concordat considered lesser, the ones too weak or too primitive or too strange to deserve better postings. There was Lieutenant Kira Vasquez, his second in command, a brilliant tactical officer who should have been commanding a battleship, but instead was stuck here because she had dared to criticize a Concordat admiral. There was Engineer Thox, a four-armed Belvari, whose people had been in the Concordat for 300 years, but were still treated like newcomers because they refused to abandon their traditions. There was Medical Officer Yen, a quiet Sylphine whose species communicated through colors that shifted across their skin, and who had been assigned here because other species found them unsettling to look at. All of them were the forgotten ones, the overlooked ones, the ones the Concordat did not want to see. Marcus had learned to love this crew because they understood what it meant to be dismissed. And together, they kept Threshold Station running even though Concordat Command sent them outdated equipment and barely enough supplies to survive on this particular day. Marcus had called his senior officers to the briefing room because he had received a message from Earth. And the message had filled him with a familiar anger. Ambassador Chen addressed the Concordat Council yesterday, Marcus told his officers. And he noticed how they all straightened in their seats. Hoping for good news but expecting disappointment, Kira leaned forward with her dark eyes sharp and focused. Asking what the council had decided, Marcus let out a long breath before answering, explaining that Earth had requested 3 things: better assignment postings for human officers, access to advanced technology that other species already shared freely among themselves, and a single seat on the Concordat Security Council. The council denied all 3 requests, Marcus said, and he watched the hope drain from his officers' faces like water from a broken cup. Thox slammed 2 of his 4 fists against the table in frustration, his rough voice demanding to know what excuse the council had given this time. Marcus pulled up the recording of the council session on the briefing room display, and they all watched as High Chancellor Vexthera addressed the human ambassador. Vextor was a crystalline being who stood 3 meters tall, a body made of living mineral that sparkled with internal light, and she was considered the wisest and most powerful leader in the Concordat. But Marcus had learned that wisdom and power did not always mean fairness. The recording showed Vexthera looking down at the human ambassador with something that might have been pity or might have been contempt, and her voice rang out like chimes in a cold wind. Humanity has been part of our great alliance for 15 of your years, Vexthera said in the recording, And in that time you have contributed little of note, you have proven nothing of value, and you have shown no qualities that would justify elevating your status among civilized species. The human ambassador tried to respond, pointing out that humans had served loyally in every capacity they were allowed. That human scientists had made contributions to Concordat research. That human soldiers had fought and died in Concordat peacekeeping missions. Vexthor raised one crystalline hand to silence him, and her next words burned themselves into Marcus' memory. When humanity has proven itself worthy of notice, perhaps we shall notice them, but until that day comes, your species will remain where you belong, at the edges, at the margins, in the places where your failures will not inconvenience those who matter. The recording ended, and the briefing room was silent. Tien shifted colors from calm blue to angry red. Their skin expressing what words could not. Kira spoke quietly, asking if they were really just charity cases to the Concordat. If that was all humanity would ever be. Marcus looked at his officers. These people who had served with him through years of neglect and disrespect. And he wished he could tell them something hopeful. But he had no hope left to give. The Concordat keeps Earth in the Alliance because our solar system has resources they want, Marcus admitted. And they tolerate us because we are useful for the jobs no one else wants to do. But they will never see us as equals. Not unless something changes. Thox asked what could possibly change the minds of beings who had already decided that humans were worthless. Marcus had no answer. That night, Marcus sat alone in his quarters and looked at a photograph of his sister May, who served as a junior diplomat on Earth, working under the ambassador who had just been humiliated before the entire galaxy. He thought about his parents, who had been so proud when humanity first made contact with alien life, who had believed that the stars would bring opportunity and wonder. They had died still believing that, and Marcus was glad they never lived to see how wrong they were. He was about to turn off the lights and try to sleep when his communication panel lit up with an alert from the sensor array. Marcus frowned because Threshold Station monitored the void border, the empty expanse of space beyond Concordat territory where no ships traveled and nothing lived. And in 15 years of service, he had never seen the sensors detect anything unusual. He walked quickly to the command deck and found Kira already there, staring at her console with an expression he had never seen on her face before. "Captain," Kira said, and her voice was strange and tight. "You need to see this." Marcus looked at the sensor readings, and for a long moment he could not understand what he was seeing. Something was coming through the void border. Something massive, something that should not exist. The readings showed thousands of objects moving in perfect coordination, emerging from the darkness beyond known space. And they were heading directly toward Concordat territory. Marcus opened a communication channel to Concordat High Command, his hands steady even as his heart pounded. And he reported what his sensors had detected. The response came back within minutes. And it was exactly what Marcus had expected. "Threshold Station, your sensors must be malfunctioning," the Concordat officer said with obvious boredom in his voice. "There is nothing beyond the void border. There has never been anything beyond the void border. Run a diagnostic on your equipment and stop wasting our time with human hysteria." The channel closed before Marcus could respond. Kira looked at him with fear in her eyes, asking what they should do. Marcus watched the sensor readings grow stronger as the unknown fleet drew closer, and he felt something cold settle in his chest. "We do what we always do," Marcus said quietly. "We watch, we wait, and we hope that someone eventually listens." But deep inside, Marcus knew that no one would listen until it was far too late. The Overlooked were about to face something the galaxy had forgotten, and they would face it alone. 3 days passed, and Marcus watched the unknown fleet grow larger on his sensors with each passing hour. And still Concordat High Command refused to believe his warnings. he had sent 17 separate reports, each one more urgent than the last. And each one had been dismissed with the same contempt that humanity had learned to expect from their so-called allies on the fourth day. The fleet emerged fully from the void border, and Marcus finally understood what was coming for the galaxy. Ships were not made of metal or composite materials like Concordat vessels, but rather they seemed to be grown from living tissue fused with dark machinery. And they pulsed with a sickly bioluminescent glow that made Marcus think of deep-sea predators hunting in absolute darkness. Kira ran the ship configurations through the station database, searching for any match in known records. And when she found the answer, her face went pale as death. "Captain," Kira whispered, "these ships match ancient records from before the Concordat even existed. Records that were classified as historical mythology. Records about something called the Ravagers." Marcus had never heard the name before, but Thox had, and the four-armed engineer began to shake with a fear that Marcus had never seen in him. Explained in a trembling voice that the Ravagers were a parasitic hive civilization that had terrorized the galaxy 10,000 years ago, consuming entire worlds and stripping them of all life. And they had been defeated only through the combined sacrifice of 100 species, most of which no longer existed. "The histories say they were destroyed completely," Thox said. "But the histories were wrong. They were only sleeping, waiting in the darkness between stars. And now they have awakened." Marcus looked at the sensor readings and counted the enemy ships. And when he reached 3,000, he stopped counting because the number no longer mattered. There was no force in Concordat space that could stand against such a fleet. He opened another channel to High Command. And this time he demanded to speak with someone in authority, someone who would actually listen. And after an hour of waiting, he was finally connected to Admiral Selvax, a Serpentine being who commanded the Concordat Third Fleet. "Human, I am told you are causing panic with your impossible claims," Admiral Selvax hissed through the communication channel. "The Ravagers are myths, stories we tell to frighten children, and I will not waste military resources investigating the fantasies of a primitive species." Marcus transmitted his sensor data directly to the Admiral, showing the massive fleet, showing the biomechanical ship designs, showing the trajectory that would take them straight to the heart of Concordat space. Admiral Selvax was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost its arrogance. "This cannot be real," the Admiral whispered. "This cannot be happening." "It is happening," Marcus said firmly. "And you need to mobilize every ship you have. You need to warn every world in the Concordat. You need to act now before it is too late." But it was already too late. The Ravagers did not wait for the Concordat to prepare, did not wait for fleets to assemble or defenses to activate. And instead, they bypassed Threshold Station entirely and struck directly at the core worlds with a speed that should have been impossible. Marcus watched in horror as reports flooded in from across the Concordat, as world after world fell silent, as billions of lives were snuffed out in Hour's Nexus Prime, the capital world of the Concordat, where High Chancellor Vexthera held court, was attacked by over 500 Ravager ships and its legendary orbital defenses. Defenses that had stood unbreached for 8,000 years. Fell within 6 hours. The Concordat military, which had grown soft and complacent after centuries without a real threat, was completely unprepared for an enemy that fought with savage efficiency and showed no mercy. Fleets that tried to stand and fight were overwhelmed within minutes. Their advanced ships torn apart by Ravager weapons that seemed to feed on energy shields and grow stronger with each kill. Worlds that tried to surrender were consumed anyway, because the Ravagers did not want territory or resources or political power. They wanted only to feed. By the 5th day after the invasion began, the Concordat had lost 12 core worlds and over 40 billion lives. And the military command structure had completely collapsed, Marcus received a final transmission from Concordat High Command, and the message filled him with a rage so deep that he could barely breathe. All outer stations are hereby ordered to fall back to designated safe zones in the inner territories. The transmission stated in a voice that tried to sound calm but could not hide its terror. Priority evacuation is authorized for species of strategic importance. All other personnel are to shelter in place and await further instructions. Kira read the full evacuation order and found what Marcus already suspected: that Earth was not included in the protected zones, that humanity was not considered a species of strategic importance, that the Concordat was abandoning them along with every other overlooked species on the fringes of known space. "They are leaving us to die," Kira said, and her voice was flat with shock and shifted through colors so rapidly that Marcus could not read their emotions. While Thox let out a roar of fury that echoed through the command deck, Marcus thought about Earth, about his sister May, about the 8 billion humans who had no idea that an ancient nightmare was coming for them. And he thought about how the Concordat had decided that those 8 billion lives simply did not matter. He thought about all the years he had spent trying to prove that humanity deserved respect, trying to earn a place among the stars through hard work and loyal service. And he realized that none of it had ever mattered. The Concordat had always seen humanity as expendable, and now they were proving it. Marcus walked to the communication console and opened a channel to his entire crew. To all 47 beings who had been assigned to this forgotten station because they were not important enough to serve anywhere else. "I know you have all seen the evacuation order," Marcus said, "and I know you understand what it means. The Concordat has abandoned us. They have abandoned Earth. They have decided that our lives are worth less than their own." He paused and looked around the command deck at the faces of his officers, human and alien alike, and he saw fear in their eyes, but also something else, something that looked like defiance. "I am not going to follow that order," Marcus continued. "I am not going to run away and hide while the Ravagers destroy everything I love. I'm going to stay here at Threshold Station, and I'm going to fight, not because the Concordat asked me to, but because it is the right thing to do." Kira was the first to respond, stepping forward with her shoulders squared and her voice steady. "I am with you, Captain," she said. "I did not join the service to abandon innocent people, no matter what species they are." Thox nodded his massive head, declaring that his people had been overlooked for 300 years, but they had never been cowards. And he would stand with Marcus until the Endian turned a deep shade of purple that Marcus had learned meant solemn commitment. And they placed one delicate hand over their chest in the Sylphine gesture of loyalty. One by one, every member of the crew pledged to stay. And Marcus felt tears prick at his eyes, even as he forced himself to remain composed. "We cannot stop the Ravager fleet," Marcus admitted. "We are one station with 47 people against thousands of enemy ships. But we can slow them down. We can buy time for Earth to prepare. We can show the galaxy that the overlooked are not as worthless as they believed." He pulled up the station's historical records, files that no one had accessed in centuries because no one thought they mattered. And he found what he was looking for. Threshold Station had been built at the Void Border Junction, a strategic choke point where ancient space lanes converged, and the precursor civilization that had once ruled this region had constructed a massive defense network to protect it. That defense network had been dormant for 10,000 years, its systems untested and its weapons unpowered. But the control interfaces were still connected to Threshold Station. "We are going to wake up something old," Marcus said with a grim smile. "And we are going to make the Ravagers remember why they should have stayed asleep." He sent one final message to Earth, a message for his sister, a message for all of humanity. "This is Captain Marcus Chen at Threshold Station. The Ravagers are coming, and the Concordat has abandoned you. I am going to hold them here as long as I can." Use the time I give you. Prepare your defenses. Do not let humanity die without a fight. And remember that we were never as small as they said we were. The Ravager Vanguard was 12 hours away, and Marcus had work to do. The ancient defense platforms began to glow with power for the first time in 10,000 years. And Marcus watched through bloodshot eyes as systems that had been dormant since before humanity learned to make fire slowly came back to life. He had been awake for 36 hours straight, working alongside his crew to reactivate every weapon and shield generator they could find. And they had managed to bring perhaps 1/10 of the precursor network back online. It would have to be enough. The Ravager Vanguard appeared on sensors at exactly the moment Marcus had predicted. 300 biomechanical warships emerging from faster-than-light travel with a flash of sickly green light. And they immediately began scanning the area for threats. Marcus knew they would find Threshold Station within minutes. And he knew they would not expect any real resistance from such a small outpost. That expectation was the only advantage he had. All hands to battle stations, Marcus announced through the station intercom. This is not a drill. This is not a simulation. This is the moment we prove that the overlooked are not helpless. Kira took her position at the tactical console, her fingers dancing across controls as she armed every weapon system they had managed to repair. And her face was calm even though her hands were shaking. Thox was down in engineering, holding together systems that were never designed to work under combat conditions, using all 4 of his arms to bypass failing circuits and reroute. Power from non-essential area scene had transformed the medical bay into a triage center, preparing for casualties they all knew were coming, their skin cycling through calming colors in an attempt to soothe the wounded before they even arrived. The rest of the crew manned their stations throughout the station. 47 souls against 300 enemy ships. And not one of them tried to run the Ravagers' detected Threshold Station and changed course to intercept. But they did not seem concerned, did not alter their formation or raise their defenses. Because what threat could a single station possibly pose to a fleet of biomechanical monsters? Marcus let them come closer, waiting until they entered the optimal range of the ancient defense platforms. And he felt his heart pounding so hard that he thought it might burst from his chest. Now, Marcus whispered. And Kira opened fire. The first volley caught the Ravagers completely off guard. Beams of energy that had not been fired in 10 millennia, lancing out from hidden platforms and tearing through the organic hulls of the lid. Ship's 12 Ravager vessels exploded in the first 3 seconds, their biomechanical forms rupturing and spilling strange fluids into the vacuum of space. The remaining ships immediately began evasive maneuvers. But Marcus had anticipated that, and he used the station's maneuvering thrusters to reposition between 2 defense platforms, creating a crossfire zone that the Ravagers had to pass through to reach him. More ships died in the crossfire, their pilots unused to facing any real resistance. And for a beautiful moment, Marcus allowed himself to believe they might actually win this fight. Then, the Ravagers adapted. They were a hive mind. Marcus realized a single consciousness spread across thousands of ships. And what one learned, they all learned instantly. The surviving ships began moving in patterns designed to minimize their exposure to the defense platforms, weaving through the weapon arcs with a coordination that no individual pilots could have achieved. They also began targeting the platforms directly, pouring concentrated fire into the ancient structures until they cracked and shattered. Marcus watched his advantages disappear one by one, and he knew he had to change tactics. Kira, bring up the asteroid mining charges, Marcus ordered, and load them into the torpedo tubes. Kira looked at him with confusion, pointing out that mining charges were not weapons, that they were designed to break apart rocks for mineral extraction, that they would barely scratch a Ravager hull. They are not for the hulls, Marcus explained. They are for the debris field. He pointed to the remains of the destroyed Ravager ships, which were drifting in an expanding cloud of biomechanical wreckage. And Kira suddenly understood the mining charges detonated among the debris, sending shrapnel flying in all directions at incredible velocities. And the organic hulls of the Ravager ships were vulnerable to the razor-sharp fragments in a way that energy shields would have protected against more ships fell, torn apart by the remains of their own dead. And the Ravager hive mind paused in something that might have been shock or might have been rage. Marcus did not give them time to recover. He vented plasma from the station's reactors, creating a superheated cloud that obscured sensors and burned through organic tissue. And when Ravager ships flew through the cloud trying to reach the station, they emerged damaged and disoriented. He used the station's tractor beams to grab chunks of destroyed platform and hurl them at enemy vessels. Improvised projectiles that the Ravagers were not expecting. Broadcast false sensor readings to make the station appear to be in multiple places at once, forcing the enemy to split their fire. Every trick, every improvisation, every desperate gamble that Marcus could think of, he tried. And each one bought them a few more minutes of survival. The Concordat military would have been horrified by his tactics, would have called them uncivilized and dishonorable. But the Concordat military was running away while Marcus fought. His crew performed miracles when the primary weapon array took a direct hit. Kira climbed into a damaged maintenance pod and manually aimed the backup weapons while the pod filled with smoke when a hull breach opened on Deck 7. A young human engineer named Pavel sealed it by welding himself inside his emergency suit and using his body as a temporary patch until reinforcements arrived when the medical bay lost power. Yen performed surgery by the light of their own bioluminescent skin, their colors shifting to provide whatever spectrum their patients need. 47 overlooked beings refused to surrender, refused to retreat, refused to die quietly. Hours passed, and Marcus lost track of time entirely, his world narrowing to the tactical display and the endless stream of decisions that kept them alive for one more minute. 1 more hour. Concordat forces across the galaxy picked up his transmissions, his constant broadcasts that updated his status and his kill count, and they watched in disbelief as the primitive human held his ground. This is Threshold Station. Marcus broadcast on all frequencies, his voice hoarse from exhaustion but still defiant. We have been fighting for 18 hours. We have destroyed 87 enemy vessels. We have lost 9 crew members, and we are still here. We are human. We are holding, and we are not running on the Concordat refugee ships. Officers who had dismissed humans as worthless listened to the broadcasts and felt something unfamiliar growing in their chests on Earth, which had received Marcus's warning and begun desperate preparations. Admiral Sarah Okonkwo played his transmissions for every crew member in the defense fleet. That man is buying us time with his life, Admiral Okonkwo told her officers. Every minute he holds is another minute we have to prepare, and we will not waste his sacrifice. The battle raged on, and Marcus felt his body beginning to fail, felt the exhaustion dragging at his limbs and clouding his thoughts. But he forced himself to stay focused. He thought about Earth, about his sister, about the billions of humans who were counting on him, even if they did not know his name. He thought about his crew, the dead and the living, the humans and the aliens who had stood beside him when no one else would. He thought about High Chancellor Vesthera and her words about humanity proving itself worthy of notice. I hope you are watching. Marcus whispered to himself, I hope you see what the overlooked can do. 52 hours after the battle began, Marcus was still standing. The station was still fighting, and 112 Ravager ships had been destroyed. The enemy had learned to fear Threshold Station, had learned that the small outpost at the edge of known space was not the easy target they had expected, but They had also learned that Marcus could not hold forever. The Ravager hive mind gathered its remaining forces and prepared for one final overwhelming assault. Determined to crush this unexpected resistance once and for all, Marcus looked at his crew, at the 11 survivors who had fought beside him through 2 days of hell, and he knew that the end was coming. "It has been an honor," Marcus said quietly, and his crew nodded in response. Too tired for words, but not too tired to fight. The final wave approached, and Marcus prepared to meet it head-on. The final wave of Ravager ships descended upon Threshold Station like a swarm of hungry predators, and Marcus watched them come with eyes that had not closed in 3 days. 188 enemy vessels remained from the original 300, and every single one of them was now focused on destroying the station that had humiliated them. Marcus had 11 crew members left, and the station was falling apart around them. Hull integrity was at 12%. Life support was failing on 6 decks. The main reactor was overheating, and most of the weapons had been destroyed or depleted. They had nothing left to fight with except their refusal to give up across the galaxy. Beings of every species watched the battle unfold through the transmissions that Marcus continued to broadcast, and they held their breath as the final assault began. High Chancellor Vexthora sat in a refugee transport far from the fighting, surrounded by the other leaders who had fled while the Concordat burned, and she could not look away from the screen that showed what was happening at Threshold Station. She had called humans worthless, had said they contributed nothing of value, had declared that they would never be worthy of notice. Now she watched as one human captain defied everything she believed, and she felt shame burning in her crystalline heart. Admiral Selvax, who had dismissed Marcus's warnings as human hysteria, stood on the bridge of his damaged flagship and stared at the tactical display with tears running down his serpentine face. He had lost his entire fleet trying to defend the core worlds, had watched his best officers die because they were not prepared, and he knew that if he had listened to the human, none of this would have happened on Earth. Admiral Sarah Okonkwo had assembled the largest military force humanity had ever created. Every combat-capable ship from across the solar system gathering to defend their homeworld. She played Marcus's broadcasts over the fleet communication network, letting every crew member hear the voice of the man who was dying to give them a chance. "Captain Chung has bought us 6 days," Admiral Okonkwo told her officers. 6 days that the Concordat said we would not get. 6 days that a handful of forgotten people earned with their blood. We will not let their sacrifice be meaningless. Back at Threshold Station, Marcus watched the Ravager ships enter weapons range and knew that he had one last option. One final card to play. The ancient defense network had been built around a central power core, a reactor of precursor design that had been dormant for 10,000 years. And Marcus had discovered during his desperate research that the core could be overloaded. The resulting explosion would tear a hole in spacetime itself, destroying everything within a massive radius and sealing the void border junction for centuries. It would also kill everyone aboard Threshold Station. Marcus opened a channel to his remaining crew, explaining what he had found and what he intended to do, and he gave them one last chance to escape. "There are 3 functional escape pods left," Marcus said. "If you leave now, you might be able to get clear before the overload. I am ordering you to evacuate." Kira was the first to respond, and her answer was exactly what Marcus expected: permission to refuse that order. "Captain," Kira said firmly, "I did not stay this long to run away at the end." Thox laughed, a deep rumbling sound that echoed through the damaged engineering section, where he was still fighting to keep the station alive. "My people have a saying," Thox said. "A warrior who dies beside friends is never truly dead. I will stay with you." "Captain," Yen shifted to a color that Marcus had never seen before, a deep violet that seemed to glow with inner light. And they spoke aloud for the first time since Marcus had known them. "We have been overlooked our entire lives," Yen said, their voice soft and musical. "But today the galaxy will see us. Today they will remember." One by one, the remaining crew members refused to leave. Humans and aliens standing together in defiance of death itself. Marcus felt tears on his cheeks. But he did not wipe them away. "Thank you," he said quietly. "All of you, thank you for being here." He began the overload sequence, inputting codes that had not been used in 10 millennia. And the ancient reactor began to build toward critical mass. The Ravagers sensed something was wrong. Their hive mind detecting the energy buildup, and they accelerated their attack, desperate to destroy the station before Marcus could complete whatever he was planning. Weapons fire hammered against the failing shields, each impact shaking the station to its foundations. A direct hit collapsed the ceiling in the command center, and Marcus was thrown to the floor, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. Kira pulled him to his feet, shouting that they had to hold on for just a few more minutes. Marcus forced himself to focus, to push through the pain and exhaustion, and he watched the reactor charge building toward the critical threshold. The Ravager flagship, the largest of the biomechanical vessels, positioned itself directly in front of the station and began charging its main weapon. Marcus knew the blast would destroy Threshold Station before the overload could complete. "Docs," Marcus called into his communicator. "I need full power to the forward shields. Everything we have left." "Captain, if I do that, the reactor containment will fail early," Docs responded. "The overload will happen, but it will not be as powerful." Marcus looked at the Ravager flagship, at the weapon that was seconds away from firing, and he made his choice. "Do it," Marcus ordered. "Do it now." Docs rerouted every scrap of remaining power to the forward shields, and the ancient reactor screamed in protest as its containment began to fail. The Ravager flagship fired, and its weapon struck the shields with enough force to destroy a small moon. The shields held for exactly 2 seconds, just long enough for the reactor to reach critical mass. Marcus had one final moment of clarity, one heartbeat of peace amid the chaos, and he used it to send one last message. "This is Captain Marcus Chen of Threshold Station," he broadcast to the entire galaxy. "I am human, and I want you to remember what humanity can do when we are given no choice but to fight. We do not surrender, we do not retreat. We stand and we hold, and we make you pay for every inch of ground. Remember us, remember what the overlooked achieved today, and never again assume that the forgotten are worthless." The reactor exploded. The blast was like a new star being born, a wave of energy that tore through the fabric of reality itself, and it consumed everything within 10,000 kilometers. Threshold Station ceased to exist in an instant, along with every one of the 47 beings who had defended it. The Ravager Vanguard was annihilated. 188 biomechanical warships reduced to atoms in the space between heartbeats. The Void Border Junction, the passage through which the Ravagers had planned to send their main invasion force, collapsed in on itself, sealed by the spatial distortion that Marcus's sacrifice had created in the darkness beyond. The Ravager hive mind recoiled in shock and pain, suddenly cut off from the territory they had already conquered, their vanguard destroyed, their invasion route closed. They had expected easy prey, easy victories, easy consumption of yet another weak galaxy. Instead, they had found a species that refused to be consumed, a species that would burn themselves to ash rather than submit. The Ravagers retreated back into the void, not defeated but wounded, not destroyed but remembering, and in their ancient alien consciousness, they filed away a new piece of information about the galaxy they had tried to consume. There was a species called humanity. They were not to be underestimated. Again, the explosion faded, and where a Threshold Station had once stood, there was only silence, only darkness, only the eternal stars bearing witness to what had happened. And 47 souls had stood against the darkness. And though they had fallen, they had not fallen quietly on every Concordat world that still survived. Beings of every species watched their screens go dark as Marcus's final transmission ended, and for the first time in 10,000 years, the galaxy wept for humans. The galaxy was silent for 3 days after the explosion at Threshold Station. A silence of mourning and reflection that spread across every surviving world. The Ravagers had withdrawn back into the void. Their invasion route sealed, their vanguard destroyed. Their advance halted by the sacrifice of 47 beings that the Concordat had dismissed as worthless slowly. Tentatively, the survivors began to emerge from their hiding places and assess the damaged 12 core worlds had been lost, along with over 40 billion lives. And the Concordat military had been reduced to a fraction of its former strength, but the invasion was over. And everyone knew why High Chancellor Vexthora returned to Nexus Prime 3 weeks after the attack. Walking through the ruins of the capital city that had once been the center of galactic civilization, the crystalline spires that had stood for 8,000 years lay shattered across the ground, and the bodies of those who had not escaped in time were still being recovered from the rubble. Vexthora made her way to the Grand Council chamber, which had somehow survived the bombardment mostly intact, and she found it filled with representatives from every species in the Concordat. They had come to demand answers, to assign blame, to understand how their mighty alliance had been brought so low, and they had come to talk about the humans. The recording of Marcus Chun's final broadcast played on screens throughout the chamber, and every being present watched in silence as the human captain delivered his last words to the galaxy. I am human. And I want you to remember what humanity can do when we are given no choice but to fight. When the recording ended, the chamber erupted in arguments and accusations. Species blaming each other for the disaster. Politicians trying to deflect responsibility. Military leaders pointing fingers at anyone. But themselves Vexthora raised her crystalline hand and called for silence. And the chamber fell quiet. We failed, Vexthora said. And her voice carried the weight of a leader who had finally understood the depth of her mistakes. We failed the galaxy. We failed our people. And we failed humanity most of all. She gestured to the recording that still displayed Marcus's face, frozen in his final moment of defiance. This man warned us about the Ravagers, and we dismissed him as a primitive engaging in hysteria. He begged us to listen, and we laughed at him. And when the invasion began and we had a chance to stand together, we chose to run and leave the overlooked to die. Vexthora looked around the chamber at the faces of her fellow leaders, and she saw shame reflected in many of them. But this man did not run. She continued, his crew did not run. 47 beings that we had abandoned held the line for 6 days against an enemy that destroyed our fleets in hours. They gave us time we did not deserve. They died to save a galaxy that had treated them with nothing but contempt. She paused and drew a deep breath before speaking her next words. I was wrong about humanity. I was wrong about all the species we call lesser. And I will spend the rest of my existence trying to atone for that mistake. The human ambassador rose from his seat at the back of the chamber. The same ambassador who had been humiliated by Vexthora's dismissal just weeks before. And he walked to the center of the floor. My brother died at Threshold Station, the ambassador said. And the chamber realized that this was Mei Chun, Marcus's sister, now elevated to lead Earth's diplomatic mission. He died along with 22 other humans and 24 other beings from species you have overlooked for centuries. Mei looked around the chamber with eyes that held no anger, only a quiet determination that reminded everyone of her brother. My brother did not sacrifice himself for a seat at your table, Mei said. He did it because it was the right thing to do. Because when innocent lives were threatened, he could not stand by and watch them be destroyed. Because that is what humans do when no one else will act. She stepped closer to the High Chancellor. close enough that she could see her own reflection in Vexthera's crystalline body. But now you understand something that you did not understand before. May continued. Humanity does not need your respect. We have always known our own worth. You are the ones who needed to learn it, and you learned it the hardest way possible. The chamber was completely silent as May Chun delivered her next words. Earth is not asking for favors. Earth is not begging for recognition. Earth is telling you that we are your equals. And if you want our alliance in the dark times that are coming, you will treat us as such. The vote was unanimous. Earth was granted a permanent seat on the Concordat Security Council, full access to all advanced technology, and the right to establish military bases throughout Concordat space. Human officers were promoted to command positions in the rebuilt Concordat fleet, and human tactics and training methods became mandatory study for all military personnel. But more importantly than any political concession, something fundamental had changed in the way the galaxy viewed humanity. The overlooked were no longer overlooked. 5 years after the Battle of Threshold Station, a memorial was constructed at the site where Marcus Chen and his crew had made their stand. The base debris field where the station had once existed was declared a protected memorial zone, and a monument was built in its center. The monument was made of stone from Earth, metal from Belvar, crystal from Nexus Prime, and materials from every homeworld of the crew members who had died, all fused together into a pillar that stood against the stars. On the pillar were inscribed the names of all 47 who had fallen, and beneath the names was a single inscription. They faced them alone, so billions could live. Humanity stood when the galaxy fled. We will not forget. We will never overlook them again. Pilgrims from every species traveled to the memorial, some to pay respects, some to understand, some simply to stand in the presence of something larger than themselves. On the 10th anniversary of the battle, a young human cadet named Elena Vasquez made the journey to the memorial. She was the daughter of Kira Vasquez, who had died beside her captain in the final moments of the fight. And she had joined the Concordat fleet because she wanted to honor her mother's memory. Elena stood before the monument and read her mother's name, and she felt tears running down her cheeks, even though she had been too young to remember her mother clearly. An elderly alien approached and stood beside her, a serpentine being with scales that had faded with age, and Elena recognized him from historical recordings as Admiral Selvax. Had spent the years since the battle advocating for human rights in the Concordat, trying to make up for his failure to listen when it mattered. And he had traveled to the memorial every year since it was built. What was he like? Selvax asked quietly. Captain Chung, I only spoke to him once, and I was too arrogant to truly hear him. Elena considered the question before answering. I never met him, she admitted. But I know what he taught us. He taught us that humans do not give up, that we fight even when there is no hope, that we stand for others even when they would not stand for us. Selvax nodded slowly, his old eyes fixed on the monument. The galaxy knows that now, he said. We learned it the hard way, and we will never forget. They stood together in silence, human and alien, the daughter of a hero and the admiral who had failed to prevent the tragedy. Around them, the stars burned cold and bright, the same stars that Marcus Chun had watched from his observation window all those years ago. But the darkness between those stars no longer seemed quite so empty, because the Ravagers were still out there, waiting in the void, remembering the species that had wounded them, and humanity was waiting. 2 Earth's fleet patrolled the void border now, human ships standing guard where human heroes had fallen, and the rest of the galaxy slept safer knowing they were there. The war was not over. Not truly, and everyone knew that the Ravagers would return someday, but when they did, they would not find the galaxy unprepared. They would not find humanity overlooked. They would find a species that had proven itself in fire and blood. a species that had earned its place among the stars through sacrifice and courage. A species that would never again be dismissed or forgotten. Marcus Chen had faced the darkness alone. And in doing so, he had changed. The fate of two civilizations, the Ravagers would always remember the price of underestimating. Humanity and Earth would never be overlooked. Again, Elena placed her hand against the monument, feeling the cold stone beneath her fingers. And she made a silent promise to her mother and to Captain Chen and to all the others who had given everything. "We will be ready," she whispered to the stars. "And we will make you proud." The void was silent, but somewhere in the darkness, something ancient stirred. The next chapter of humanity's story was just beginning.